Welcome to the third in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey. My name is Rob Meager, and today's interview will discuss the lecture, The Crucible of Awakening, Transcending Exclusive Identity, Separation, and Division, Part 2 of 2. This lecture was originally given online on June 12, 2013, and it is available in written form in Dharma Sky, an ebook you can order at the Sacred Attention Therapy website at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/books. You can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/education. And now a little bit of background about Richard Harvey. He is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He is the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And it's now my pleasure to welcome to the call Richard Harvey. Good to be out with you as always.
Hi, Rob.
Hello. And we have some wonderful material. I always say that, but it's always sincere and it's always heartfelt. The Crucible of Awakening, Part 2 of this two-part lecture. And I want to begin today's interview by talking about how you begin this lecture. And you begin it, if you recall, with a beautiful visualization, or what might be referred to by some as a guided meditation. And I can remember when we did it in the lecture over a year ago, and I've since actually used it with other groups as a guided meditation. And this guided meditation, it begins with these few lines: see a big blue sky with no clouds, no disturbance, just an endless blue sky, a vast sky. And as you peer into this blueness, faint forms appear, blurred images. And this visualization goes on to invite images and forms to develop, but then to blend together. Then this visualization goes into where everything disappears and it's just darkness. And we're in effect in the void. And then it comes back to waking up in this blue sky that we began with. And it draws it to a close by inviting us to enter the world more fully. And then it closes with these few lines and the ultimate question that I want to begin today's interview with. This visualization exercise ends with this: what will remind you, what will shock you from this complacency and delusion? What will be trustworthy or faithful enough for you to recognize the paleness of the existence in which you live and die? What will it take for you to awaken? And I wanted to ask, is what will awaken each person unique to that person? Or is there one event that will awaken all souls simultaneously?
Well, it's the same event, but in a different closing, so to speak, in a different expression, so to say. But there's only one thing that will awaken any person, and that is truth, or God. So truth that will awaken each and every one of us appears, however, in a million guises, a trillion guises, a squillion guises. It is in fact always available. It's always there. I think that and thanks for reminding me about it, that the guided imagery exercise there seems to take us through the world of appearance to the place where there's a void or nothing, and then back again to the world as it appears, but with the suggestion that we can see beyond it even while we're within it. And so what this means to me, and I think means to us who are interested in awakening, is that anything, it potentially is the means of awareness, absolutely anything. Which is why when the Buddha, for example, in the Sermon of the Flower holds, I happen to have something here, it's not a flower, but when he holds up the flower, we're told, Mahakashya, or Ananda in another tradition, is immediately enlightened, and out of the thousands of sannyasins there in the deer park, not one of them other than Mahakashya is enlightened. The rest of them are perplexed because they expect a sutra of some sort. But this is the sutra. Yeah. So that's a wonderful one, I think. And it reminds us to be alert, to be aware, to give attention to the smallest things, to the biggest things, to not discriminate or discern, and not ever think that this world of appearance isn't brimful of miracles every second, absolutely every moment. So that's the secret there, and that's what practice is about, is to constantly be living in the apprehension of truth through the heart, not of course through the mind, which is a flimsy sort of a thing, but something that's big enough and expansive enough to apprehend the truth. And that, of course, is the heart.
I may have shared this with you in a previous interview, and maybe it was not all that long ago, so hopefully I'm not repeating myself too soon. But I was recently gifted with the insight that in this time and space, in this experience we call a lifetime, we will not be able to waken from the dream. We can only waken in the dream. The distinction is we're still in this experience. We can awaken in it, in effect being enlightened, but we can only awaken from it once we've passed through the veil. Does that resonate? Hopefully I'm explaining the insight well enough. Does that resonate with you?
You can awaken fully beyond this present experience of life, even while the body is involved in the present lifetime. And the reason is that you're not the body. Or because that's offensive to some of us, you're at least not exclusively the body. Or another way of putting it is you are a spirit in a body, which is to say the spirit will remain when the body has fallen away. And so the idea that you have to die physically for something spiritually to happen is the basic fallacy that spirituality is somehow an experience, whereas the reality is that you have to forego all experiences to enter into truth, into the spiritual state of being. It's not an experience. An experience is finite. An experience has a beginning and an end. An experience has a certain quality. Spiritual source, or God, or love, or wisdom, or Satchitananda, is beyond all qualities or beginnings and ends. And it is therefore not an experience. So chasing an experience is a little bit like, and we've spoken about this theme before, the end of seeking. Seeking by and large, because when I'm attached to my body and to my identity and my personal survival, and so therefore death is a meaningful event that comes as a finitude in my life, implies that I seek for a deeper kind of an experience. The thing to remember about true spiritual practice is you forego all experience for the infinite, for the eternal, which isn't a happening. It's not a relative affair, of course, when you think about it. It is, however, the source of all expressions and finiteness and relativity and time and space and all of that. But it isn't in itself experiential. It's beyond experience. So, I mean, I don't want to say I disagree with what you just put forward, because there's various different ways to take it. But I would say that the physical death of the body is by no means, in any ways, pertinent to any form of enlightenment. It's merely irrelevant.
Thank you for that, because that insight that I shared that was gifted to me often comes up in discussion at some regular discussion groups I facilitate. So it's nice to have that piece of insight that I can share back with the students that come to this discussion group. I want to go back to an answer you provided to this first question, and the first question was is what will awaken each person unique, or will there be one event that will awaken all souls simultaneously? And you shared that what will awaken everyone is the truth, or God. In other teachings that I follow and facilitate discussion groups as a result of those teachings, the concept of truth comes up a lot, and it seems to be a nebulous word that is a challenge for many people to define, let alone imbue, let alone take in and know what it is. What is truth? You mentioned it's truth, it's God that will awaken everyone. So is God truth? And if God is truth, then what is God?
Yeah, God is truth. Truth is reality. Reality is God. And there is the best way to come at it is, as it were, as a sculptor rather than an artist who is accruing or accumulating. In other words, if an artist daubs paint onto some other sort of substance and creates a picture, a sculptor takes away until something is created which arguably is inherent there in the first place. And so the only way you can really come at truth or reality or God, which are synonyms, is to take away. Keep taking away everything that is in temporary existence in the world of appearances. It is adaptations of reflections of truth, if you will. That's the best we can say about it. Whatever it is. Whatever it is here is a kind of world of shadows, and the way I've spoken about this, again we've touched on this before, is to pierce the veils of thought, of separation, and of nature, and see that all of them are temporary arising adaptations of the absolute, which is another synonym for God. We've got so many words for God and for the absolute, for Brahman, on and on and on. Not only so we can have holy wars and be absolutely appalling to each other, but so that we can have perspectives on God or love or wisdom from point of view of our God-given, if you will, lifespan. So culturally, geographically, location-wise, in terms of beliefs in the society, we look at it a different way. It's hard sometimes to, or it has been hard for me anyway, to understand First Nations or American Indians' ways of looking at it. But when you go deeper and deeper into it, or Borneo, or South America, various places, some traditions are easier for us because somehow we resonate with them. I've resonated somewhat with the ancient Vedas. I mean, they're not so perplexing to me as First Nations religions, for example.
Yeah.
I resonate with them for whatever reason. I don't know why. But the truth is the truth, and ultimately, as in the metaphor of the ladder, where you climb the ladder and eventually you let go altogether of any rungs or ladders, religion, of course, is also a road or a means or a way to come to the truth, and at that point, there really isn't anything you can say about it. So the way is to discard. It's called neti in India. Just not this, not that, not the other, nothing at all. Keep it going, and eventually, whatever's left, that's going to be it. And that's the self-sourcing reality or truth, or God.
There's an atheist who he self-identifies as an atheist who comes to one of my discussion groups on a regular basis. And he's just a delightful soul, because his atheism comes from the family of atheists who are not interested in denouncing, but they're interested in inquiring for the purposes of understanding and purposes of knowing. And he makes it a passion of his, actually, to study the various faith traditions. He self-identifies as an atheist, but he makes it quite a passion of his to study the various faith traditions. And he says, I know when I've come across a truth, when it's something that weaves its way through all of the faith traditions, when it's something that appears pretty much unanimously in all the faith traditions, he says, I know I've found a truth, which doesn't seem to be quite what you just shared, but it's this person's way, of getting to the truth. As you move on in this lecture, you touch on an interesting topic, and that is esoteric versus exoteric spirituality, and the impact of the two being mixed together, which you mentioned can be confusion, misunderstanding, and chaos. Can you speak briefly to what esoteric and exoteric spirituality is, their respective places in this world, and where you see humanity at this time in regard to esoteric and exoteric spirituality?
We have had now 3.5, 4, 5,000 years, hard to know when to stop counting, of exoteric spirituality, known as religion or organized religion, or religion that is power-based or is knit into society and into politics. For example, when you consider the 2,000 years ago in Galilee, this is an extraordinary mix of religions coming from different countries and all converging in the place of Jesus' life, for example. And it's very, very complex, and you can't hardly unembroil the politics and the power base and the meeting of societies and cultures from the religious nuances that are taking place there. I mean, the Gospels are just filled with that, sometimes implied and sometimes obvious. So we've had it for thousands of years now, and that is the externalized spirituality known as religious teaching. For example, one obvious way is in the form of expression of external morality, for example. Now, there's a power base or a political or a societal investment in that morality being a certain kind of dictate to people. We've, for example, lived for a very long time in fear of what the masses mean. It's a little bit like a pack of dogs or something. You know, what will happen if people get together and they're not ruled and they're not given guidelines and laws and all of this kind of thing. So we have Moses, so we have tablets, so we have lines and what we better not do and all this, and so we rebel or conform and all of this. So this is exoteric, and this is, at best, it's a comfort, of course, to people who are exclusively involved in the world. And at worst, it's a heinous misuse of spirituality, because it's a kind of dictatorship, really, where people, out of fear, conform to what they're told to do from on high. It could be the king, the earthly king, as much as anybody else, of course. Esoteric spirituality, on the other hand, has by its very nature, because it's inner, if exoteric is outward, then esoteric is inner, and is also secret. Has a secretive feel about it, has an inward feel, has a personal feel about it, and of course has been associated over thousands of years with the feeling of, or the experience of a special kind of initiatory ritual that's involved. So monks or yogis and whatnot, all this kind of thing, going through some kind of clandestine rites whereby they very often emerge with a different name, different lifestyle, different head of hair or no hair, you know, all these sorts of symbols of transformation, and then may indeed be privy to a deep esoteric hidden teaching which otherwise isn't given. Now, it's a very interesting question of yours, because these esoteric hidden spiritual teachings which were only given to the in crowd, so to speak, are more or less all exposed now in the day, this modern era of the internet, incredibly. So, you know, we what a time we live in, whereas hundreds of years ago you may have to scale a mountain, you may have to stand outside of a gate in the snow, you may have to prove yourself in all kinds of ways just to get to the beginning of it. You and I can press a button now, and we can just bring it up, you know, and hear it all. Whether we get it or understand it or value it, it's another matter, of course. But you know, you can do it, I can do it, anyone here listening can do that now. I very much doubt there's anything much left that isn't available to us on push of a button. And what this has meant, largely, is that what is precious has been cheapened, has been devalued. We haven't understood the alchemy of the relationship to something that I desire, or that motivates me, or my soul is intent on, and then what I have to do to get it, to then gather it to me, as it were. You know, there was for example, in the 60s, or maybe it was the early 70s, a kind of scandal about the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in relationship to the Beatles and Donovan, all these pop stars who brought the Maharishi to the West, and he founded TM, of course, Transcendental Meditation. And he was a very serious yogi, as far as I can make out, in the East. But of course, you know, he became famous. And then this scandal arose in the Western mind that Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney of the Beatles or somebody like this were giving him all this money, and then they would go with flowers and fruit, and then he would give them the mantra and whatnot, and that would be the right into the organization. But then somebody found out there was only 3 or 4 mantras. Therefore, it was some kind of a con. Of course, it wasn't a con. I mean, the whole thing of these exchanges between the master and the devotee is the quality and what takes place in the rite or the ritual whereby you then acquire it and it's given. So even if that mantra were only one, if it was only Aum or love or, you know, something, it really wouldn't matter, would it? Because it would still be a unique experience. But from point of view of the materialistic Western mind,
Yes.
you could only see it in material terms, and therefore it was money or fruit and flowers, at least, for nothing or just for something that was repeated. That wasn't the point at all. So the position today is, and when we've spoken, I don't think we've spoken here very much about the Arhat, but you know, I've written, and I know you know about the Arhat project, Rob. Whenever I've talked to people about it in regard to outreach or bringing people in and all of this, I said this isn't fundamentally what the spiritual community I have in mind is about, because the spiritual community that I have in mind is essentially esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
It's firstly not involved in outreach or any kind of improvement in the world or anything like that. I would like it to be a model of spirituality, absolutely for its own sake, pure and unadulterated, and standing for the rights and the discipline in a human life of manifesting the spiritual here on earth. That's it, before it goes and does anything. And spirituality doesn't really do. That's in the exoteric department. So I would say today we have a paucity of the esoteric.
Mm-hmm. You go on to talk about the intellectualizing of spirituality. I'm just going to read a paragraph here from the lecture that speaks to this idea of intellectualizing spirituality. I have taught those of you who were here before, referring to previous lectures, that there are 3 veils of darkness. This is a way of understanding ignorance in the modern era. These 3 veils are thought, non-relationship, and nature. Thinking, merely the first veil, is enough to entirely preclude any reality, not only from spirituality, but from everything we do, feel, believe, or see. Thinking has nothing whatsoever to do with spirituality. This is a fundamental law of authentic spiritual teaching. Thinking is anathema to spirituality, because spirituality is about a deeply transcendent, everlasting apprehension of the truth. It is not even an experience. That is how deep it goes into our organism, our form, and our formlessness. And my question was, are we not all contributing to the intellectualizing of spirituality? I mean, take this interview, for example. I mean, here we are. Are we not engaged, in an intellectual process of making sense of our spirituality through the discussion of these lectures? And when is the intellectual process involved in esoteric and exoteric spiritual practices?
Let me take the first question first.
Okay.
I'm going to take a guess at it. I mean, I don't think that you're as interested in intellectualizing spirituality as you are in the truth itself. And if our talk had the flavor of intellectualizing, I think it would affect you listening to it as it affects you and I as we create it, this exchange, in a different way. The question I would ask is, where is it hitting you? Where is it impinging on your energy system? I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know if you know what you're talking about, but I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not sitting here trying to think of a clever answer to a intelligent question so that we will intellectualize or make some philosophy here. There is no philosophy of the spiritual as such, and the only validity for it would be as a ways and a means which will in time be discarded. The thing to remember is the act itself rather than what it appears to be or what it resembles. And I know that for me, I can't speak for you, but the act itself is of responding to a kind of, it's almost like a color or a sound when you say things. It's almost like a note or looking at a wood or a flower or something. And then something comes back, and what it is that comes back isn't really so very different or separate from what it is you've seen. You can go out and you can look at a flower or a stone or a tree or the sky in that separative relationship that I was talking about in the quote. In other words, you look at the sky. Or you can go out and you can merge into the sky and you just let go and you feel free and you feel blue and expansive and wonder. And you let it pervade you, and your molecules are not really so very solid at that point. I mean, that's a relationship. That's a way of being with it. This is how these conversations are to me. This is how writing is to me. I'm a failed intellectual. I never thought it was much good, really. And that turned out to be right. It turned out to be right. So not knowledge for its own sake, but knowledge as ways and means sometimes, and having the courage to be spontaneous and surrender, and not to know what it is you're going to say next or do next in your life. I think the second part of the question was distinguishing it in the exoteric and the esoteric, and of course the answer is that in the exoteric, unless you had a very different kind of society or politics, and maybe there are some today still in primitive societies here and there, but in the increasingly global Western culture, for sure, the answer is the intellect, because we are still under the influence of the Greek model of education. We're still under the influence of Descartes and of Western philosophy. And this is still what we aspire to. And I think until people grow up and understand that you don't get a suit and then try and wear it in some way, but you rather look at human beings and you allow them to fashion their own suits. What you'll see very obviously, and only Rudolf Steiner and possibly Montessori are privy to this notion, is that children are in the realms of imagination until they're nearly 8 years old. Don't get them to read and write. Don't get them to intellectualize. Don't get them to think. They don't want to do it. They want to experience. They want a soul experience. They want to merge with experience. And so you have generations now. It's almost so endemic that we're lost, but maybe we can retrieve it, who, as people who have an invalidated imagination, an invalidated internal life, you see. So even in my, I mean, you know, I'm early 60s now, so I'm going back to the 50s. We had to sit at desks and we had to write and we had to read. And we all instinctively knew in the 50s, and kids know today, it doesn't work, it doesn't fit us. We don't want to do that. We want to go down to a stream, you know, or go to some woods or do some things maybe, but we don't want to sit and write about it. What do we have to write about or to be abstract about?
Mm-hmm.
We have nothing to be abstract about because we're still in the realms of magic and nature and God and merging, and you see it's not so very separate and divisive yet. So we can do a lot with education, and let's hope that we do.
I've often shared with students who come to some of my study groups that we can't think our way to truth. We can't think our way to God. It's just not how it's done. It's just not how it's done. And you know, I invite them when they come to a new teaching, and especially teachings that seem a challenge to at first understand. So you could take any scripture, or you could take the teachings of the East, so the Dhammapada, or even the Tao Te Ching. When one's reading it, if one's not oriented towards philosophy, you know, my invitation is, don't try and make sense of it here. Try and make sense of it here. And if you're not sure what it means to make sense of it here, let it speak to you. Let some spark of the teaching, a word, a line, let it have a resonance with you. And when it does, let the spark grow. But don't try and make sense of it up here. You'll never get there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, make sense of it. Make sense of it in your heart.
You're reminding me of this experience in India where you would go and you say, well, I'll just come and see the master talking when there's a translator or when he's speaking English. And they say, no, you come anyway when he's speaking Hindi or Maruti or whatever it is, Pali or something. You know? And you go along, and the idea there isn't that it doesn't matter what he's saying, but it is that the spiritual sustenance or nourishment, the transmission, if you will, is inherent in the listening to him speak, not in your making intellectual sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's merely our interpretation, which is of judgment.
Which is probably a hiding to nowhere.
Well, I'm going to invite us to leave it there for today. That was the end of this two-part, The Crucible of Awakening, which really was a two-part lecture series that covered or attempted to illuminate the first stage of your awakening in your three-stage model. So I look forward to continuing on with this series. And until the next time we come together, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.